Whenever people think about rivalry in Starcraft, this is often the matchup that comes to mind first. Flash versus Jaedong, the ultimate weapon versus the Tyrant, the best pro gamer ever in any esport versus one of the most decisive and talented Zergs of all time, and that's Jaedong on the right, the Tyrant, currently up 3-0, and that 6-6 thing you see on your screen is the record versus each other. This match is from '09. This is from an era when both of them were sort of entering the peaks of their powers and were well-established god-tier players. And the thing about Jaedong, he was known for his TVZ, specifically the muta, and how he would use muta micro to pick apart his opponents. He's a very high APM player, and he's a very decisive player. And you have to remember that at this time, Flash was called God and the ultimate weapon. It didn't take him until 2020 and winning all the ASLs to be the most scary player and the player that everybody feared the most, because whenever it came to having to face off against Flash, he was this infallible macro player that you really couldn't touch. And here we see Jaedong is up 3-0 in this Pro League set, so he's going for the all-kill. This is a King of the Hill style format, just like Pro League pretty much always is. And that means that if you win, you get to keep playing. You know, just like when you're playing with your homies back in the day, taking turns doing 1v1s. The thing is, though, instead of getting to play his bad Protoss friend that does stupid cheeses, Jaedong gets to play the best pro gamer ever in any esport, Flash. A guy who is not only known for having a perfect micro, but perfect macro. A guy who never falls off no matter how high APM the style that he's using requires, like SK Terran vs Zerg, you know, going up to 6 base. That's nothing for Flash. For most of us, that's like impossible. Remember in Brood War, there are limits on the amount of units you can put in a control group. There's no multiple building select. There's no auto mine. You can't just hotkey all your racks and hold down A. There's certainly no control army hotkey, which shouldn't even be in StarCraft 2, as we see Flash putting down his first depot in the bottom left of the map Rush Hour here. And Jaedong, pretty much known as like one of the most handsome and talented players, and he's sort of like a favorite of the fangirls, as we see fangirl art there only being lowered to obstruct her face. That's like a really common thing whenever you watch old Pro League VODs or even like the GSL. Like if ever they do a crowd shot of a female fan, they cover their face. I guess it's a cultural thing. I'm not sure. I've never been to Korea, but it's certainly something that's very common. It's sort of odd because certainly in America, like, oh, they show the crowd shot, the person's gonna like love it and bask in the attention. As even in the GSL, we see, or like in these Pro League games or in old Star League games, if there is a Western fan in the crowd, if they pan to them, like the Western fans don't cover their face. In the last game that I casted, which was incredible and you should check out, just an absolutely legendary game, link will be in the description. They panned to a Western fan that had a sign that said Team Liquid supports fantasy all-k1ll, and he did like a throat-slitting motion when it panned to him. Jaedong taking his natural here, and he has an overlord over his natural. This is to watch for any bunker nonsense. I remember whenever I first started trying to learn StarCraft 2, taking my natural was very difficult in terms of Terran vs Zerg and not dying to bunker rush. Of course, this was still in the days where you could get double bunker blocked and salvage existed. And obviously Brood War is not really like this, although Brood War, because you start with 4 workers, it's more mechanically intensive. The wind up is slower. It's not like StarCraft 2 where you surge right into the mid game. Flash deflecting a little bit of scouting there from the Dong. The Dong range southbound and pretty much try to get into Flash's base. As you see 4GG there in the middle. So if you're wondering, well, if Jaedong's up 3-0, who did he defeat? He defeated 4GG, who I know many of you are familiar with because he's been streaming StarCraft 2 for like 10 years. And then 2 Zerg players. I remember Idra once quipped of 4GG that, like, referring to his stream, that he would just do stupid coin flips and then spam ads. Which was literally completely true, especially for the StarCraft 2 era 4GG. Whenever the game was in its prime in 2011 and 2010. Certainly if you were watching 4GG in that era when you had all the EG guys, including the late in control, Idra Machine, DeMuslim Stefano, like if you were watching him over those guys, like you were probably pretty crazy in my opinion. If you look back at 2011, 2010, 2012, this was like the golden age of Twitch and the golden age of streaming, especially if you were a StarCraft fan. If we look at what Twitch has become, like a tawdry, disgusting gimmick site where ad spam is rampant, there's really no comparison. And it's one of those things where if you were around in the glory days of the scene, it's almost hard to explain to like the Zoomers like how much they missed. And that's true in a lot of things, not just StarCraft. So we can see that Flash has expanded, obviously. It's Flash. He's not going to go for a coin flip. Does an SCV transfer. He's getting his eBay. Usually in this matchup, a lot of Terran pushouts will be predicated off of getting +1 attack. And Flash is one of these guys, a super clean macro that's always going to start his +1 on time. We can see him going into Academy after this. Again, standard. Usually you want to get Stim and then Marine range in that order against Zerg, and in general, just like in StarCraft 2, Stim is very powerful. Lings running around the natural of Jaedong, keeping tabs on what's going on. Jaedong here teching into the lair, getting a second gas. Normal stuff here. I hope that we're going to get to see Jaedong's muta play as a bunker starts there for Flash as we see Lings moving out, because Jaedong, known for the muta and had god tier muta micro, and if ever someone was microing mutas really hard and really well, people would sort of quip like, oh, he's microing his mutas like Jaedong. It'd sort of be like saying like, oh, he's using his op like Kenny S. If you're more familiar with CS as opposed to StarCraft. There we see Jaedong, a god tier player who in StarCraft 2 would go on to play with evil geniuses, and although he would make some deep runs, notably like I think it was a dream hack against a Protoss player named Stardust, he would never win a major title in StarCraft 2 despite being an S-class Brood War player, and Flash only won one title in StarCraft 2. And Brood War is more of a brute force mechanics skill game, and StarCraft 2 is like honestly sort of more of a thinking game, and it's more about like using the perfect game design. As you see Aspire start there, thank God. I haven't seen this game before, by the way. StarCraft 2, it's like the devs set out to sort of design the perfect game in terms of responsiveness, and you can hotkey. It's like a really user-friendly RTS. You can hotkey everything to one key. There's multiple building select. The AI is really good and responsive. When you tell a building to make, it'll make. You can box a bunch of SCVs and make a bunch of depots at once. You can shift-click them back and tell them to start mining. I started with StarCraft 2 and I'm trying to like learn Brood War retroactively. Brood War is a game from the 90s. We're doing everything, even moving your army from point A to point B is really hard. And I know some of you are probably sitting there saying like, well, StarCraft 2 is better because it's like a more like quote unquote like well-designed game, as you see the Terran player pushing out a touch here. But like in reality, like the point I'm making is Brood War is more skillful. Like it's way, way harder to be good at Brood War than it is to be good at StarCraft 2. And if you're a new player, StarCraft 2 is more user-friendly and it's the easier game to get into. But if we're talking about the absolute top-end god-tier players, as the first set of mutas come out here for the Dong, I think that Brood War is more exciting to watch, because you take a guy like Flash, the most brilliant mind in all of esports, as Flash is trying to kill this weird hidden third base at the 9 o'clock for Jaedong. And does Flash know about it yet? I don't think he does, because that's what you call an LZ gamer base, the Cajun Zerg, which was where you take like a stupid base that nobody would ever check. As Lings run in here, and in combination with the mutas, kill the army that was trying to retreat and protect the man against the mutas. Brilliant move by Jaedong, as that's one thing that he was always known for, is being really sharp and decisive, especially when it comes to mutas and Lings. And if we think about Zerg in general, being decisive is important, because it's a Zerg. The Zerg as a race wants to go like pure drone into pure attacking unit. You don't want to do some drones and some attacking units. It's a linear thing. You want to explode with drones, hit your power spike with as many drones as possible, and then like go into mass muta and Ling, and then drone your third base. As we see, Flash does not have vision of that Jaedong third at the weird 9 o'clock. And this is a very frustrating scenario for Terran, where you're trying to get your turrets up, the Zerg's henpecking at you with the muta. And the thing about the muta is whenever you pick at the Terran bio, you force medic energy, and the Terran doesn't really have an answer for that until they get the glorious vessel, which has a radiate. Jaedong trying to kill that second gas, because he sort of knows, okay, the irradiate is the thing that I'm trying to fade. It's like if you have pocket kings in poker, you're sitting there and saying to yourself like, my god, I hope an ace doesn't come. Jaedong sitting here to himself saying, I'm doing a lot of damage with my mutas. My muta micro is great. I'm already going into lurker. But the thing that I really don't want to see on the map right now are vessels, because not only do they counter my muta, they can see lurker. And this game has been absolutely incredibly fun to watch, non-stop action, and even if there aren't directly units dying, the players are going back and forth and doing intelligent moves and parrying each other's blows. Just consider that, because I think a lot of people sort of mistakenly think like, oh, for like a game to be good or entertaining, like there has to be like a ton of mistakes or like stuff dying. Not necessarily mistakes, but like the newbie person who said that wouldn't even like see it as a mistake, and it would just be like, oh, a lot of stuff died or like a base died. This game is exciting. In reality, what makes a game exciting is when two players are doing the correct thing and sort of parrying each other. In other words, it was like when Flash moved out and looked around and was trying to find a third, and right when he was about to discover Jaedong's third, just like it was Metal Gear Solid, Jaedong flew in with the mutas and distracted him. There's more of a give and take in Brood War than there is to Starcraft 2. And I just love to see that. Brood War being so difficult makes it like the more interesting and fun game to watch. As lurkers burrow here, but there is a vessel out. So Jaedong sort of sighing to himself, saying like, okay, well, crap, like I did my best to stop that vessel getting out, and right when my lurkers got over, he did have the vessel out, but we see irradiate going down as the vessel dies, and that's what you want to do, folks, whenever your muta gets irradiated, is pull it out of the group as quick as possible, because that little green cloud irradiate is like a huge damage over time, like area of effect spell. And we see Jaedong surges in with Ling Muta, and a surge of lurker spines are going to hit the Terran bio, but a lot of Jaedong's stuff dies. The mutas perish because they're weak from the irradiate, and a couple lurkers are there, but lurkers, remember, really aren't that good offensively without support. You want to have mutas or lings or defilers there because obviously when you run up and they burrow, the Terran can take pot shots at you, and that's especially true once they have Vessel out, because once they have Vessel out, they don't have to like fumble with their scanner hotkey. By the way, I use 0 and 9, which are bound to my mouse keys, actually 8 and 9. 8 and 9 are bound to like my thumb mouse keys, and I use those for Starcraft hotkeys, because your left hand, I found, can only really reach to like 1 through 6 or 7 reliably. And if you're new to the game, it's really like 1 through 3, to be honest, if you're brand new. But as we see a vessel go down there, great job by Jaedong. That's one thing that we saw him do in my last cast versus Fantasy, was he was so good at sniping vessels. That's a huge part of TVZ, guys. This late game TVZ, really a lot of it's about vessel versus defiler, man. And we can see Jaedong coming in with Lurker Ling here, and going into Defiler wasn't as popular in 09 as it is now. The Defiler almost being viewed appropriately, I might add, as like as an Infestor tier unit, sort of Infestor-like in the sense that, and I'm talking Prime Infestor here, as two Lurkers get irradiated and popped, is now Zergs think like, oh, the whole point of the matchup is to get Defiler, and we think about like Wings of Liberty StarCraft 2, the whole point of the matchup was to get Infestor in the last year and a half of the game. That wasn't the case for the first year and a half, by the way. It took Zergs a while to figure that out, and it took the maps getting bigger and the Overlord and Queen getting better for them to be able to get there. So trying to ford across the bridge is the mighty ultimate weapon, and he does, and he's sort of deducing here, like, that was sort of a weird setup for you to have on that bridge, and he's like, oh shit, there's a base here, weirdo. And Jaedong says, yeah, it's been there for a while, and he burrows his lurkers. And it's the weird thing where lurkers, even though they're god tier on top of ramps, if the Terran gets up into your base that you hit or didn't defend properly, the lurkers aren't so good at running up the ramp and retaking the base. More beautiful irradiates occurring on the lurkers. And again, this is what it looks like when two guys are god tiers. The Defiler Mound finishes and Flash makes another base in his main. As we see Jaedong running all over the map, getting map control, putting lurkers here, putting lurkers there. But conversely, Flash is incredible at controlling his vessels and is consistently irradiating the lurkers down and really not allowing Jaedong to get up into the annoying spots that he wants. As we see a Marine clear an annoying lurker there that was a touch mismicroed. Jaedong trying to defend this top middle base, and again, this is what you want to do if you're Terran, is you go forward with the vessels and irradiate the money units, the lurkers, the defilers. That's what you want to really irradiate, and then you can sort of get in there and get nasty with the Zerg, as we see Flash hammering this base and killing it. Beautiful play from the ultimate weapon, and again, running in with those vessels first and softening the Defilers, softening the Lurkers, getting under Jaedong's skin a bit, punching out that static Zerg defense is so critical for that. Because if you just try to go in without leading with your vessels or scanning properly, then you're just going to get butchered by a really intelligent macro Zerg like Jaedong. He's going to have Lurkers there, he's going to have Defilers there, and if you're watching closely, you'll notice that he did have those things there, but Flash uses his vessels so well, where again, you see every time they pan the shot, if you're watching closely, a Lurker gets irradiated before it burrows, and some more Scourge coming out for Jaedong. And this is good because we saw him versus Fantasy do so well with the Scourge, and Flash has sort of had carte blanche to just fly around, as Flash is sort of saying like, oh shit, he has some Scourge out there, and he kills a couple. And when you're playing Flash, he just has way more stuff than it seems like he should, and we see all these Lurkers are going to get irradiated here, and Flash is just going to really want to have control of that high ground. Lurkers on top of ramps, the bread and butter of Zerg, and unless you have tanks in the mid game or Lurkers or vessels in the late game to counter the Lurkers, it can be very difficult to ford up those ramps. And if we look at how Zergs take their base, their third base, sort of in the natural order of things in this matchup, well, what are they doing? Well, they're getting Lurkers on top of a corner main usually, and getting Lurkers on top of that high ground. Because until you have vessels, man, it can be a bitch to get up that ramp. As Jaedong is pushed back here, we haven't seen too terrible much of Defiler action here from the Tyrant. Really no plague at all. I'm pretty sure he just got it done researching, but just a couple emergency swarms, because oftentimes you'll see Jaedong like running with some Lurkerling and throw a swarm down in a third and like crack the base. But again, the vessel's really the crux of the issue. Two of them go down, Dark Swarm goes down, but without enough energy to parry forward, Jaedong's just going to sort of sit there and stall. And Flash says, okay, well, Irradiate still works under Swarm, and he zaps some of the money units and just walks away. And vessels are over the money units of Jaedong. Again, notice how consistent the irradiates are here. This is one of the most important parts of macro Terran in late game TVZ, as it seems like, well, Jaedong hasn't really used the Defiler that much or got many big plagues. Well, part of that is he can't get his Defilers where he wants them. As we see, oh, an Eraser might go down here. Is there a ton of drones at that base, and a ton of stuff dies. He doesn't even need to Eraser, as a plethora of Lings go down. And Jaedong's sort of in this position where he's lost a bunch of consecutive fights, and he just has to try to attack, as hilariously a tiny little hex of that hatchery is vulnerable as multiple Dark Swarms are down, and Flash wants to kill that hatch that has a pube of health, and he does, as he had to come in from the north like Robb Stark to do it, as a scan goes down and kills that Lurker. And that's one of those things where, as Terran, it's sort of hard to have defenses everywhere in Brood War. It's not as simple as making your fourth base a PF. And Flash had to go back there and address that, because Jaedong really was just trying to establish some breathing room. Remember, the Dong here is up 3-0, but Flash is so good, if Jaedong dies, their team can get reverse all killed. They can get reverse swept. So Jaedong going for the all-kill here against the ultimate weapon. This really is one of the biggest tasks you can ever be given as a pro gamer. Like, okay, you're up 3-0, you're red hot. The other team has Flash. They have Ted Williams. You know, they have like Randy Johnson in his prime. They have MJ in his prime. Okay, they get to throw Flash at you. Well, at least you're warmed up, right? As we see a couple more Lurkers get irradiated, which I'm fastidiously pointing out as a vessel goes down, because when they burrow, you can't see that they're irradiated, and the observer isn't like clicking on them and showing they're irradiated, but we can see, oh, Scourge flying in, and again, you might, as mines go down, which will be very useful for stopping Hydras and Lings. But you might be saying to yourself, well, why doesn't he just make a bunch of Scourge? Well, he's playing Flash, so Flash just has way more stuff than he should, because his macro's perfect. And anytime he wants to fly in Scourge, Flash is there. And again, Defiler runs up a little bit of pressure up on the bridge, but as soon as that occurs, a counter irradiate goes down. Flash is playing nearly perfectly. I mean, this pretty much is perfect. I haven't really seen him make a mistake. They call this guy God for a reason. And Jaedong doing really well too, but it's sort of like, what do you do when your Terran opponent plays perfect? And like, wow, a bunch of, just a ridiculous amount of Hydras go down there. Double irradiates as again Flash getting all of his spells off. You can tell he's sort of gone into a more Vulture-centric mix, wants to get mines down. That's one of the best ways to prevent late game Zerg from just running at you and getting a lot of map presence is the Vulture. And we pretty much saw no factory presence in the mid game from Flash. But Jaedong knocking on the third base here, or I guess that's the fourth of Flash, as I really have never seen a game played on this map, to be honest. But he's hammering away at the fourth. It's that weird thing where it's like, okay, he Dark Swarmed and has Lurkers. I guess I'll just go somewhere else. As finally a big plague goes down, and Vessels having about half health, but some of them having low health here, and they are vulnerable to Hydras, especially the low health ones. Because remember, whenever you plague Vessels, they go super duper low, and because there's no auto repair in Brood War, it's just very difficult to do stuff like that. As we see Lurkers being crushed here, great arc there by Flash, as well as beautiful vessel control. It's one thing when you watch Brood War and appreciate it and just like it for what it is, but it's another thing if you play the game and like know how hard some of their stuff that they're doing is. Like just doing what we're seeing, what's called SK Terran, which is Bio Terran with mass science vessel and no tank. That's the hardest thing to do in Brood War. The hardest thing to control, the hardest style to execute. And Flash has just been doing it perfectly. As we see Vultures being used here sort of for map control and utility, and they're being used to get mines down and not just let the Zerg run wild. A couple of radiates going down as, oh my god, the Hydras explode. Bio here from Flash. Going to be stem forward here. 2 Carapace on the Hydras, but big deal. And I really wish I could just cast these games from replay so I could click on the upgrades and stuff, but I'm glad we get to shoot the reaction shots as, oh my god, the rest of the vessels went down. More Scourge going in, as even though it looks like Flash makes it look so easy and it looks like Terran's infallible, it's really easy to screw up and lose as Terran. Very, very easy. All you have to do is miscontrol your vessels a little, especially with SK Terran. It's very, very unforgiving, especially versus Tier 3 Zerg. Because we can see between Scourge and Defiler and Hydras, it's no longer carte blanche free range for Flash. He can't just walk anywhere he wants and irradiate anything he wants. As defensive matrix, basically, if you've been paying attention, hasn't been used at all. It's been pretty much only irradiate. Consume on the Defilers, such a crucial spell, and we can see Jaedong, of course, using it. And if you're a newbie Zerg player and your Defiler mount finishes and you've sort of heard me talk about how good the Defiler is, and you're like, what do I get? You get Consume first, always, and then you get Plague, which is really good, and then you get the energy upgrade. Because once you get the energy upgrade, you can do ridiculous stuff like cast 2 spells, because it maxes out your energy cap, as we see a bloody massacre on the Plagued Bio, as multiple vessels spamming irradiate down. Remember, there's no smart casting, so Flash is having to click these vessels one by one and control the others to make sure they don't get killed. It's not like just hitting 3 and having 15 infestors and casting a couple fungals, which, even though I like smart casting and theoretically think it should be in a game, I think whenever Starcraft 2 sort of got mastered, I think we realized it was flawed. More vessels going down here as Bio surges up to protect the vessels, but this is what I was talking about, where Jaedong has gone like pretty Hydra heavy here to combat the SK Terran vessel style, and an irradiate occurs right on the Defiler before it can get a spell down, but it does get a plague down before it dies. And there's no transfuse in this game, so it's not like you can walk your Defilers back and like transfuse them through the irradiate damage. And that's how most units are in Brood War, because Irradiate does do so much damage. It's like, well, okay, something got irradiated, I'll just move it in. And a Lurker gets burrowed, and another one gets burrowed behind it on the ramp. And Jaedong, the Tyrant, trying to push upon this little middle base, and he gets pushed back. Beautiful job by Flash to continuously try to lay mines in the retreat path, because the Zerg can't realistically have an Overlord like every 5 feet. This ain't a 2011 ZVP where Idra's dropping creep with Overlords to a Protoss base. There is no creep drop in this game. So using mines in your opponent's retreat path was always an incredible strategy. Irradiate going down on the Defiler again. Flash playing nearly perfectly, but it's not like we've been seeing Jaedong make mistakes. As a base gets lifted there, and because of the Dark Swarm, this becomes very perilous for Flash to deal with as he tries to pull back again. And this is exactly what I'm talking about when both players are playing nearly perfectly. And unfortunately for Flash, that base is just going to get hammered with Hydras, and thankfully he saves it. But because Dark Swarm is so powerful and SK Terran is honestly somewhat flimsy, even though it feels very powerful because of the spellcasters, if you lose a few fights or let Zerg, oh my god, he lost the base, or let Zerg get in a good position, it becomes this weird thing where Zerg seemingly like you can't get rid of them. You can't push them back. Like they've got lurkers everywhere. Like you can't trade well. It seems like that tier 3 Zerg, when they have defilers and get ahead, is such an uphill fight. You're always having to fight against lurkers. And Flash is sighing and he's like, oh my god, I played perfectly and I'm gonna lose. I can't believe that. As Jaedong notice has the top 2 left bases in the top left, and Jaedong, wow, he all kills KT and Flash, the ultimate weapon, the Goku of his team, defeated. And Jaedong says, hell yeah, 4GG, 2 Zerg players, and the best pro gamer of all time embarrassed. High fives his team, says, hell yeah, that's called an all-kill. That's called a sweep. That's Flash demolished. Hugs his coach. Oh my god, he's so Gosu. Throws up the peace sign. The Tyrant. And Flash is sitting there and doing what all Terrans at some point have thought, which is thinking, what else could I have done? As we saw Flash masterfully using vessels throughout that whole game. And there were a couple times where Jaedong's crushing decisiveness really shone through, and he overwhelmed Flash and crushed a couple of his armies, allowing him to move up into his third base, Dark Swarm, and really get an advantage on Flash. As remember, that third base was backstabbed while Flash was really crushing Jaedong at his side of the map. And if you like this sort of content, these old school Brood War games, I also do old school StarCraft 2. Make sure you sub and like the video and share it with your StarCraft 2 and StarCraft 1's loving friends. Link in the description, click my playlist, hit the like, sub, say easy. Say easy, easy.